Today is day 3. So the first thing we're going to do is get your back pants piece and then the pattern piece as well. And you can lay those over the top and then get some kind of marking tool. I just use this little marker and I've already poked the holes. And the notches that they have marked. So now I can just take my marking pen and mark them directly on the fabric. I have this folded down from when I did the elastic waist. Just lift that up. And then mark the rest of these holes, and this is going to be for aligning the back pocket. Alright, so now you can really see we have these markings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to do something similar for this back pocket piece. Now the right side of the fabric that I'm using is the side that's a little bit more matte. There's a side that's kind of a little bit shiny, and I don't like to use that side. Alright, so we take the more matte side, and then you take your stitch template. Okay, so then you set the stitch template on top of your pocket piece, and I poked a hole in the top of like the little mountain of stitching right here, so I can mark that point with my marker as well, and then mark the end of the line down here and the end of the line over here. And again, it's about 5/8 of an inch from these edges, the stitch template is. So then I take my ruler and connect these lines. And I only mark the top one. Once you get it under your machine, you can use the gate or the distance of your presser foot to figure out how far apart the other ones are. And then just draw this line. Oops, mine is a little bit off. There we go, this one is better. So then I will just stitch on this line, and this is the top one, and they're about 1/4 of an inch apart, the decorative stitchings are. So I'll stitch the top one, and then go in 1/4 of an inch, stitch the next one, go in 1/4 of an inch, and stitch the next one. So you want to mark this stitch line on both of these pieces. One of them you'll have to turn the pattern piece over since they are mirror images of each other. Then I'll mark the mountain again and both sides. So you should have all of your decorative stitch lines marked on the back pocket pieces, and then you should have the notches for the back pocket alignment all marked on the back pants piece. And the next step is to stitch them. So go ahead and do that. Now we have our decorative stitching done. You're going to make sure that you transferred these notches that are right on the top sides of the pattern piece to your back pocket pieces, the ones that are towards the top. And now we are going to finish the top raw edge of these pockets. You can do it by serging. If you have like a cool binding, you could totally do that too. Or just a zigzag even works. So do that, and then you're going to want to fold the pocket edge down, aligning it with these notches so it's the same on both sides. And then you are going to sew along, well, you should probably press first, and then sew along this side right here and this side using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance on both of the back pocket pieces. I opted to just do the serged edge right here for the raw edge, and then when we folded them right sides together, I sewed it at the 5/8 of an inch right here on all 4 parts. And now you're going to trim the seam allowance down to 1/4 of an inch. point, and then once it's down to the 1/4, we can go ahead and turn the pocket so that finished edge, just turn it. There we go. So the finished edge is towards the back, and then find something pointy. I have this very large needle, and you can just poke it into the corners to give it a crisp point. And at this point I would press this down, and you can press these other sides in 5/8 of an inch as well. You have to have 4 sides left. So push those ones in, or press those ones in 5/8 of an inch. And we're going to sew down this little flap. So using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're going to sew across the top of your pocket on both sides. So trim the seam allowance on the top, flip it the right way, and then press all the remaining sides in 5/8 of an inch, and then sew across this top part using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now the pocket should be completed, and we're going to place the back pocket on the back pattern piece. So you already have your marks that you transferred from the pattern piece on the back pocket. So you line up your pocket with those little dots. And then I like to use wash away wonder tape to hold my pocket in place. So I will take some of this and attach it to the back of the pocket. This also kind of acts as like a fake stitch so that you can compare the pocket placement on both of the sides without the pocket moving around, which I think is really helpful, so you don't have to sew it twice. So I just push this down on here. And then you take off the white part. I didn't used to like wash away wonder tape, and then I'm not sure what changed, but now I feel like if there's anything that's gonna move around a lot, I'm always using it. I wouldn't use it that much, it's kind of expensive, but for things like this where you don't need too much, it's really perfect. Okay, and so on your top stitching or your decorative stitching of these pockets, the mountain point is going to go towards the side seam, not to the inseam. Okay, so we just place that. Make sure it's even. And then I push it down. And then you are going to do the same thing for the other side. Put some more wash away wonder tape on here. I feel like it's really important to compare the pocket placement for the back, because even with the notches, sometimes it doesn't get exactly even. I mean, there's error always. So if you can put them on there and then compare them to each side, you can make sure before you sew it that it will be more even. I don't know if Travis would care, but I am the one that has to look at them, so it will drive me bananas. Okay, so let's place this one. All right, that looks about good. And then I will show you how to compare them. So you take the pieces and lay them on top of each other, right sides together, lining up all of the sides. And then you can peel back the top layer of the back pants piece and you can see where the pockets sit. So if they're even, if the two pockets are sitting right on top of each other, then they're exactly where they need to be. And then you just do that for all 4 sides. So pull back the top layer of fabric and see how they're not exactly even. This pocket that's on top could be pushed back maybe 1/8 of an inch to be more even. And then let me just check the bottom. Yep, and then it could be down, so it really needs to be tilted maybe like this, about 1/8 of an inch for it to be completely even. And those sides look pretty good. So we're gonna tilt it this way. So I'll go ahead and adjust this pocket, and then you're going to sew around the outside, top stitch around the outside of the pocket. Make sure you leave the top part open. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sides you should be going around. And in the top corners, there should be a little triangle just to reinforce that that's a high tension area. Now we have our pockets completely attached to the back of the pants. If you want to compare them again to make sure that they're even, you can totally do that. We are going to be attaching the back yoke piece to the back pants piece. You should have a mark on the top of your back pants piece from the pattern piece, and then also on the back yoke. And you are going to be putting them wrong sides together. This is if you're going to be doing the flat fell seam. I'll also be going over to do a faux flat fell seam using the French seam technique. So to do the flat fell seam, you're going to put the back yoke and the back pants piece wrong sides together and sew down that edge. And sew down that edge using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Again, it's wrong sides together. So it looks like you're doing it incorrectly, but you really are not. So you'll sew along this right here. For the faux flat fell seam, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to pin the back yoke to the back pants piece wrong sides together, but you're only going to sew at a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance at the top. If you're doing the regular flat fell seam, it's 5/8 of an inch. If you're doing the faux flat fell seam, it's 3/8 of an inch. Okay, so for the coral pair, I'm going to be doing the faux flat fell seam, and for the charcoal pair, I'm going to be doing the regular flat fell seam. So for the faux one, we have the pieces sewn right sides together at the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now you're going to trim the seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch, sorry. Both seam allowances. So you trim them down, and then you will turn it over with the right side facing up. It'll look like this. And you're going to press this seam and then sew the top part at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now for the regular flat fell seam, you have them sewn wrong sides together at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now we are going to trim only the pant side of the seam allowance. So we trim this one down. And then you're going to press your seam allowance open, and then I press it towards the top. Both sides towards the top. So you'll have one seam allowance that's shorter and one seam allowance that is longer. Okay, so we'll press both of these open first to separate them, and then towards the top. Once you have those pushed or pressed towards the top, you're going to take the longer seam allowance and fold it down so the raw edges of the seam allowances are meeting. Now for the faux flat fell seam, we have the seam completely enclosed and we sewed it using the 1/4 inch seam allowance. You're now going to press it down towards the body of the shorts and top stitch along the enclosed edge. So once you've done that, it'll look like this. So it looks pretty finished, just like a flat fell seam, but it is less work, I would say, or less tedious. Now for the regular flat fell seam, I have the seam allowances ironed, pressed towards the top. Then I'm going to be using the Wash Away Wonder Tape again. Makes it way less finicky. And I lined the Wash Away Wonder Tape where the smaller seam allowance raw edge is about in the middle of my Wash Away Wonder Tape piece. Okay, so that's on there. We can take the white part off. And now you're going to take the larger seam allowance raw edge and fold it down to meet the raw edge of the smaller seam allowance. And do that all the way across. This is why I like the Wonder Tape. It helps it stay. If you don't use Wonder Tape, you could probably press it. The twill doesn't really hold a press super well. So this seems like the best option. You could also use 1,000,000 pins if you wanted. Okay, so now it's all folded down and we're going to take this whole seam allowance and fold it towards the pants. And you should still have some of the Wonder Tape exposed, so it should just stick down. Okay, so then that is towards the pants. You see that there? Now we're going to stitch along the edge where we have no stitching, which is the folded edge of the flat fell seam. And you're going to stitch that all the way down. Once you've done that, it's going to look like this. So it's really hard to even tell the difference, really. I think that the faux flat fell seam is just easier to deal with. So I would probably opt for that one myself. But you can totally just do it anyway. Either way is fine. They both work great. Alright, so the last two things we're going to go over today are how to do the inseam and the side seam. First, we're going to start with the inseam. You're going to put your front pants piece and your back pants piece wrong sides together. And we're doing a flat fell seam along the inseam, which is what we just did. So line these up. And with wrong sides together, you can pin them. All the way down. All the way down here, and then you're going to sew this at 5/8 of an inch and repeat the process we just did for the flat fell seam. So trimming one side of the seam allowance, then folding it over and sewing it up. So we're doing that one. I'm doing that for the coral and the charcoal. And then for the supplex pair, all I do is line them up, the inseams, and clip down the inside. And then all I do for the supplex pair is I just serge this. So it's super fast. I serge it at 5/8 of an inch. Super easy. Okay, so now we have the back pants piece and the front pants piece sewn together with the 5/8 seam allowance. And we're going to trim down the seam allowance that is on the back pants side. So you trim that down to 1/4 of an inch. Just the back pants side. Do not trim both of them down. And this is for doing the traditional flat felled seam. Okay. And now you can press them towards the front. And then I'm going to use the Wash Away Wonder Tape one more time. And line the Wash Away Wonder Tape so the raw edge of the smaller seam allowance is right in the middle of the Wonder Tape. Alrighty. There's that. And then, oh, there we go. All right, and then pull off the white part. Why is it so finicky? Oh, there we go. Okay. Pull off the white part and then fold that larger seam allowance over so that it meets the raw edge of the smaller seam allowance. So the raw edges should be touching all the way down the inseam. And then once you have that folded, you're going to take that whole entire seam allowance, both sides, and fold it over towards the back pants piece and press it down. Now if you're not using Wash Away Wonder Tape, you can go ahead and just press those, but it is kind of a pain, so I would suggest using the Wonder Tape. Okay, and then you're going to stitch along the outside edge of that seam allowance that you just folded over, and it'll keep it down super nice without having anything to irritate the inside of the thighs. So do that for both sides of the legs. Now to do the side seam, I lay the front pants piece on top of the back pants piece, and then I just clip up the side, aligning any notches, and you just ease them together, and then you're going to sew them at the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then you can finish the raw edges with a zigzag, or you could serge them. You could even do a flat felled seam like we've been doing, or you could take some binding, oops, and put that around the raw edges. This is really nice if you are planning on rolling the shorts up. It kind of gives it a pop of color at the bottom. And here is the, let's see, this is what the inseam flat felled edge should look like after you've completed that. And that's going to be the end for today. If you're doing the supplex version, you can just serge up that side seam as well. So easy, easy.